In November of 1884, delegates from 14 European and other states sat down at a table in Berlin. Not one of them was African. Over the next 3 months, they set the rules for dividing an entire continent, and over the 30 years that followed, that continent's map was redrawn almost completely. This is the map of how it happened, not slowly, not by accident, but on a schedule, in straight lines, region by region. Watch the borders snap into straight lines across a continent that had none, and watch for the places that pushed back, because not all of this went to plan. By the end, only 2 African states will still be independent. Stay with the lines. Before 1884, Africa was not empty ground waiting to be filled in. European mapmakers had simply declined to mark most of what was already there. The continent held thousands of distinct societies, ancient kingdoms and empires, city-states, trading confederations, and stateless communities with their own governments, armies, and diplomacy. Along the coasts, European nations had trading posts going back centuries. To the powers now eyeing the interior, that existing order was about to be treated as if it didn't count. By the 1870s, a handful of things collided. European industrial economies wanted raw materials and new markets. National rivalries, especially between Britain, France, and a newly unified Germany, turned African territory into a scoreboard. And explorers' reports, like those from the Congo Basin, convinced European governments there was prestige and profit up for grabs, whether or not the land was already governed by someone else. Nobody wanted a rival state to grab it first. That fear is what actually called the meeting. So in 1884, at the invitation of Germany's Otto von Bismarck, delegates from 14 states met in Berlin to agree on rules for claiming African territory, rules about who got to claim what, and what counted as a valid claim. No African government was invited to send a delegate, and no African government's borders or authority were considered at the table. The resulting agreement is usually called the Berlin Conference's General Act. The General Act helped entrench one idea above all: a claim only counted if the claiming power could show real occupation and authority on the ground, not just a flag on a coastline. On paper, that sounds like a technicality. In practice, it turned the scramble into a race to send troops, sign treaties, and establish control inland before somebody else did. Before 1885, a European claim might rest on a coastal foothold, or on a treaty Europeans read as cession even if the African signatory meant something narrower. After Berlin, powers increasingly had to notify one another and show some real authority on the ground. One major reason the scramble sped up from paper claims to armed occupation. This is where the map starts to move. From 1885 onward, European claims push inland, not as slow diplomacy, but as a live race, year by year. Watch the color spread and, more importantly, watch the borders that follow it. Straight lines, drawn by ruler and by treaty, with almost no regard for the rivers, ridgelines, or peoples already living on the ground. The lines on the map didn't draw themselves, soldiers did, against resistance. In West Africa, the Asante Empire fought Britain across a series of wars through the late 1800s, and the Sokoto Caliphate, a large Islamic state across what's now northern Nigeria, was conquered by British forces only after years of campaigns that stretched into the early 1900s. These weren't undefended territories. They were states that fought and lost. Further south, the Zulu Kingdom under Cetshwayo inflicted a famous defeat on British forces at Isandlwana in 1879, before being conquered later that same year. In the east, the Maji Maji rebellion rose against German colonial rule in the early 1900s and was crushed only after years of brutal fighting. Across the continent, the pattern repeats. Conquest, not agreement, is what actually put most of these borders on the ground. And in the middle of the continent sat one of the starkest cases. King Leopold II of Belgium ran the Congo Free State as his personal property, not as a Belgian colony, extracting rubber and ivory through forced labor enforced with mutilation and killing on a massive scale. International outcry over documented atrocities eventually forced Leopold to hand the territory to the Belgian state in 1908. It stands as one of the most violent and notorious chapters of the entire partition. The Congo was not the only site of mass colonial violence. In German Southwest Africa, the region now called Namibia, colonial forces crushed Herero and later Nama resistance between 1904 and 1908. The German commander-in-charge declared that the Herero had to leave the colony or be shot on sight. Survivors were forced into the desert, cut off from waterholes, and thousands more later died in colonial camps. Historians, and since 2021 the German government in its own official language, have described it as genocide. It was one entry in a longer, continent-wide ledger. Only 2 African states kept their independence through this whole period. Ethiopia, under Emperor Menelik II, defeated an invading Italian army at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, a rare and decisive African military victory over a European colonial power, and one that forced Italy to recognize Ethiopian independence. Liberia, founded earlier by freed African-American settlers, retained nominal sovereignty throughout, though under heavy external pressure. Look at what actually got built. The railways laid across the new colonies were usually designed to carry rubber, cocoa, cotton, and minerals from inland mines and plantations to the coast, more than to knit African regions together. The borders were drawn with similarly little regard for existing trade routes, political communities, or kinship networks. Some peoples were split across 2 or 3 colonies, while rival communities were forced inside one. Both patterns would outlast the empires that built them. Zoom out, and the scale of what happened becomes clear. In the early 1870s, European powers directly controlled only a small fraction of African territory, mostly coastal footholds. By 1914, that figure had risen to nearly the entire continent. Watch the number climb as the map fills. This is the same territory, changing hands in one generation. That shift wasn't just a color change on a map. It meant new administrators, new taxes, and new labor demands reaching into daily life. For millions of people, those demands now came from colonial states. By 1914, the partition was essentially complete. Only Ethiopia and Liberia remained independent African states. Everything else on this map now belonged, on paper, to a handful of capitals thousands of miles away, governed by administrators, companies, and armies, along borders that had been drawn without the people living inside them ever being consulted. Now watch the same lines outlive the empires that drew them. As European colonial rule receded across the 20th century, most borders barely moved. Dozens of new independent states inherited boundaries close to the ones drawn at and after Berlin. The empires are gone. Many of today's borders still follow those colonial-era lines. We tend to remember this as a single event, a conference, a signature, a done deal. It wasn't. It was a rule agreed in a room with no one from Africa in it, and then 30 years of conquest, resistance, and negotiation that turned that rule into the map we still recognize. Stay with the lines. There are more maps to unroll.